There's a quiet revolution happening, one that doesn't begin in the streets or on the screens, but in the silence of a man's mind. For centuries, men have been taught to conquer, to protect, to achieve, but rarely to feel. They were told that power lies in control, that vulnerability is a crack in the armor, that love must be earned through performance rather than presence. And so, they became experts in strength but strangers to themselves. The illusion of emotional strength that men are taught to wear begins at a very young age. From childhood, boys are subtly trained to equate emotion with weakness and silence with power. They learn that to be a man is to be unshakable, impenetrable, and composed at all times. A boy who cries is told to toughen up. A teenager who opens his heart is told to control it. And a man who admits his hurting is told to hide it. This conditioning doesn't create strength, it creates a performance, a mask that men wear so convincingly that even they begin to believe it is real. Beneath that mask, however, lies a vast, unacknowledged emotional world that never finds language, only expression through anger, withdrawal, or indifference. This illusion becomes the foundation upon which many men build their sense of identity and worth. Society rewards it, calling them strong, dependable, stoic. Yet, in the quiet corners of their lives, many men feel unseen and misunderstood, even by those closest to them. They carry their burdens in silence, not because they don't feel, but because they've been taught that feeling too deeply is a threat to their masculinity. They suppress their grief, their fear, their longing, and replace it with the armor of control. But control is a fragile power. It doesn't create intimacy, it creates distance. It doesn't breed confidence, it breeds loneliness. And this illusion of emotional strength, so deeply ingrained, becomes the invisible barrier between them and the world they wish to connect with. In relationships, this conditioning plays out in subtle yet devastating ways. A man who cannot express his vulnerability often struggles to understand or respond to the vulnerability of his partner. When emotions rise, he feels cornered, defensive, misunderstood, not because he doesn't care but because he doesn't know how to engage without losing the composure he was taught to protect at all costs. Emotional conversations feel like battles rather than bridges. Instead of openness, there is retreat. Instead of connection, there is tension. And slowly, intimacy becomes something he both craves and fears. The illusion of strength is seductive. It tells men they are in control, that they are independent, that they are safe from pain. But it also isolates them from the very experiences that make life meaningful. Love, empathy, and connection all require a certain surrender, a willingness to be affected, to be moved, to be touched by another person's truth. When men begin to question this illusion, when they allow themselves to feel without shame, they begin to reclaim a part of their humanity that was taken from them. It is not the abandonment of strength, it is its redefinition through authenticity, not armor. The hidden cost of men's emotional suppression is not only internal, it ripples into every part of their lives. When men are taught to silence their emotional worlds, they do not eliminate their feelings, they merely bury them deeper. What is buried, however, does not disappear. It transforms into restlessness, anger, anxiety, or a quiet numbness that seeps into their relationships, their work, and their sense of self. Many men live under the illusion that emotional control equals emotional mastery, but what they are really mastering is avoidance. They learn to manage the appearance of strength while slowly losing touch with their inner reality. This suppression becomes a silent corrosion, eroding their ability to connect, to empathize, and to experience life in its fullness. Emotional suppression creates a distorted lens through which men perceive the world. When vulnerability is seen as a threat, intimacy becomes unsafe. When sadness is seen as weakness, tenderness feels foreign. The inability to express fear or confusion leaves them with a single emotional language that is often anger or detachment. These become the socially acceptable emotions, anger as proof of passion, detachment as proof of composure. Yet both are symptoms of disconnection. Over time, men become fluent in control but illiterate in emotion. They can manage crises but not connection, command respect but struggle to receive love. The world praises them for their stability, but inside they feel unseen, unheld, and often profoundly alone. In relationships, the cost of this suppression becomes painfully visible. A man who cannot access his emotions cannot fully meet his partner in hers. When she seeks understanding, he offers solutions. When she seeks comfort, he offers distance. The dynamic becomes one where emotional expression is asymmetrical, one gives while the other withdraws. It's not a lack of love but a lack of permission to feel. Men who have spent years suppressing their emotions often find themselves unable to explain why they feel disconnected, why affection feels heavy, or why silence feels safer than honesty. They long for closeness but fear the vulnerability it demands. This silent conditioning also affects their mental and physical health. Chronic suppression creates stress, isolation, and an emotional fatigue that no amount of external success can heal. The more they hide from their emotions, the more those emotions find other ways to emerge through addiction, aggression, or a quiet despair that goes unnoticed. The cost of suppression is not just the absence of emotion, it's the erosion of authenticity. When men finally begin to acknowledge what they feel, they don't lose power, they gain presence. They begin to inhabit their lives more fully, no longer split between who they are and who they were told to be. The moment a man begins to understand his emotional world not as weakness but as wisdom marks a profound shift in his inner landscape. For so long, men have been taught that emotions are obstacles, something to manage, suppress, or overcome in the pursuit of logic and control. Yet emotions are not the enemy of reason, they are the compass of human experience. They offer insight into needs, boundaries, values, and desires. When a man learns to listen to what he feels rather than fear it, he begins to unlock a deeper form of intelligence, one that is intuitive, relational, and profoundly grounded in self-awareness. Emotional wisdom is not about being consumed by feeling, it is about learning to read it, to interpret its message, and to respond with clarity instead of defense. This awakening begins quietly. Perhaps it starts with a moment of exhaustion from always being the one who holds it all together. Or a relationship that ends, leaving him questioning not what went wrong but what he never allowed himself to express. Gradually, he begins to see that emotions are not interruptions, they are signals. Anger points to a boundary crossed, sadness reveals what matters deeply, fear warns of vulnerability, and joy shows alignment. Once he stops labeling emotions as right or wrong, strong or weak, he begins to see them as information. This is where wisdom lives, in the ability to discern what emotion is trying to teach him rather than what it threatens to expose. As this understanding grows, relationships begin to transform. A man who embraces his emotional world is no longer governed by reactivity, he becomes responsive. Instead of shutting down or lashing out, he can stay present. Instead of controlling a situation, he can listen to it. Emotional wisdom gives him the ability to meet his partner not with defensiveness, but with depth. He begins to see that empathy is not surrender, that vulnerability does not diminish him but makes him more trustworthy. The strength he once sought through detachment he now finds through connection. This shift also changes how he perceives power. He no longer defines it by dominance or stoicism, but by the courage to remain open in the face of discomfort. He realizes that emotional fluency allows him to navigate life with a steadier hand because he is no longer fighting against himself. This kind of power is quiet, not performative. It doesn't seek to control others, it seeks to understand them. It is the wisdom of balance, where feeling and thinking no longer compete but collaborate to guide him toward authenticity and peace. When a man no longer seeks validation through dominance or distance, something fundamental within him begins to realign. For generations, men have been conditioned to prove their worth through control over outcomes, emotions, and sometimes even people. Power, in this traditional sense, was a form of currency. It offered reassurance that he was capable, respected, needed. But what happens when the pursuit of control becomes a shield rather than a source of confidence? When dominance replaces connection, and distance becomes a refuge from vulnerability? This dynamic, though subtle, has defined much of how men engage with love, work, and identity. Yet, when a man begins to awaken from this conditioning, he discovers that true validation does not come from how much power he exerts, but how authentically he shows up. Dominance and distance are two sides of the same fear, the fear of being seen without armor. Many men use dominance to assert value, believing that being in control will protect them from rejection or inadequacy. Others use emotional distance to avoid the risk of needing anyone at all. Both strategies are born from the same wound, the belief that love and respect must be earned through performance rather than presence. But neither dominance nor withdrawal brings peace. Instead, they perpetuate isolation, leaving men disconnected from their partners, their purpose, and ultimately themselves. When a man begins to understand that his worth is inherent, not conditional, the need for validation from external sources begins to dissolve. He no longer needs to prove he is enough, he begins to feel it. This shift changes how he relates to others, especially to women. He stops viewing connection as a battlefield of power and starts experiencing it as a meeting of equals. He no longer needs to win arguments to feel significant or retreat in silence to feel safe. He can stand in his truth without diminishing another's. He can listen without defensiveness, speak without aggression, and love without fear of losing control. This transformation dismantles the old patterns that once defined masculinity as dominance and replaces them with integrity, empathy, and balance. The unraveling of control is not a loss, it is liberation. It allows a man to live from a place of grounded confidence rather than fragile pride. The very energy he once spent maintaining his image now fuels his authenticity. He becomes stronger not because he controls others, but because he is no longer controlled by his insecurities. In this state, love is no longer a performance of strength but an expression of truth, and connection becomes not a contest, but a home. The awakening of balance between men and women begins when connection replaces competition, when understanding replaces judgment, and when love ceases to be a test of power. For too long, the dynamic between the masculine and the feminine has been shaped by unspoken hierarchies: who gives more, who feels more, who holds control. These silent contests have exhausted both sides. Women have carried the emotional labor of relationships, while men have carried the burden of silence. Each has felt unseen in different ways, each longing for something deeper but unsure how to bridge the distance. The balance begins to shift when men awaken to the truth that connection is not about winning, it is about being present enough to meet another person where they are, without agenda or defense. When men start to see love not as performance but participation, everything changes. The moment they step out of the need to dominate or withdraw, they create space for genuine intimacy. This balance does not weaken either side, it strengthens both. It transforms relationships from transactions of validation into shared experiences of growth. In this space, a man does not seek to lead or follow, he seeks to understand. He becomes capable of holding both strength and sensitivity, both direction and receptivity. Women, in turn, no longer feel the pressure to compensate for emotional absence. They can finally rest in a dynamic where being understood feels natural rather than earned. Balance also redefines what attraction means. It is no longer rooted in control or dependency but in mutual respect and resonance. A man grounded in emotional awareness does not fear a woman's power, he values it. He recognizes that her strength does not threaten his, it mirrors it. When connection replaces competition, love evolves from a struggle for dominance into a collaboration of truth. Both partners become mirrors, not opponents. They begin to see that real intimacy is not about possession or perfection but about coexisting in authenticity. In this awakening, men discover that balance is not about equality in roles but equality in humanity. It is about creating a space where both can feel seen, safe, and free. This is the evolution of love, a relationship where silence gives way to communication, where distance turns into curiosity, and where strength is redefined through compassion. When connection becomes the foundation, neither men nor women need to finish the other, they begin to rise together in understanding, not opposition, building something greater than power itself, partnership.